And we're live. I'm
Oh,
Kelly.
great.
I'm here with Chad Heywood. Thanks, Chad, for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.
Chad's a friend of mine. He's a super interesting guy. I feel like the first time we met, it might have been at like Chick-fil-A, and we might have talked about like founding fathers or something,
Yeah, it's a Chick-fil-A breakfast, and it turned into some long discussion on like the different personalities of the founders, like Hamilton versus Madison versus. I think you might have asked who my favorite founder was, and I said Franklin, and then we left breakfast and decided to go do our real jobs.
When you like Benjamin Franklin, is it like you like who he aspires to be as portrayed in his autobiography, or like you like the real Benjamin Franklin,
So I read his autobiography before I read anything else about him, and I loved who he aspired to be. Yeah, as a young person who was goal-driven, purpose-driven, I loved it. As I got more into, his rounded out life, I still really admired a lot of his attributes.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just look at the time he was in and that he was largely self-made, probably one of the first self-made millionaires. And
what was it, like 16 when he left to go like be a printer in Philadelphia?
Yeah, he had a rebellious streak. I think he was always pretty bright. And he says in retrospect that he really learned a lot. His dad was someone who'd like to convene people at the dinner table a lot. And they'd always have guests from the community coming in.
Oh, interesting. It's like a big podcaster.
Yeah. Early podcasting. Just have a big table in a small house and invite over lots of people from the community.
That's it.
But yeah, he always had trouble with authority, and I do too.
I love it.
I just kind of appreciated that he could be a rebel and still learn a lot and do well.
I mean, you think about influence, and I studied science and all of that, and made serious contributions early to all of that. But not to mention, Constitutional Convention in France and all the things he was gently doing to help the republic. So yeah,
absolutely.
Probably
just interested in everything, right? So like there was no topic. He just kind of looked at knowledge kind of in the whole.
Got to get in the show.
Well, one of the advantages he'd have on the show, they didn't really have specialization. Like they might have a trade, but you didn't have such a division of labor and academia. He really kind of became an expert in everything just because he was curious about everything. So anyway, here we go. We're going to go off on the whole half hour talking about Franklin.
I know, we could. Maybe instead of getting Benjamin Franklin, who, of course, viewers who are wondering, has passed away. But there was that one episode of The Office where Benjamin Franklin came, like an impersonator came. And anyway, maybe we could get that. All right, I will agree with you that we need to get off this sidetrack. Chad, I want to just talk about you as a learner. So you've talked to me before about school, people who know you today and how successful you've been. You're running your own political consultancy, getting people elected, doing all kinds of interesting things. And if they talk to you, you sound very thoughtful and educated. They would probably assume straight A student, like valedictorian. You could talk a little bit about kind of your background and how school was for you, and thinking through the lens of like learning, right? Like, were you out to learn? What did that feel like as a kid?
Well, I'm a parent of 5 kids, and you always go through this balance. My wife and I go through this all the time where do you tell your kids what you really did and maybe set a bad example for them? Or to not like corrupt any of your viewers today, particularly if some of them are students. But I would just preface it by saying I always love to learn, and looking back on the history of my long 38 years of life, I've always loved to learn, and I've been around learners. Both of my parents are teachers. I did not do well with the structure of formal education until college, and even then, there's a few good friends that probably listen to this that got me through some of my my lab classes in science. So, I think I've taken an interest in learning and in development just as a parent, trying to first understand my own learning. Why did I not take well to school for 13 years of schooling in K through 12? And why do I love to learn so much now?
Yeah.
And part of that was, I think that the traditional classroom model is just set up really well for people who like structure and really respect authority. And
it's not your thing.
No, it's just not.
You have a lot of older siblings who had gone before you, and 2 parents who are teachers. Did any of your siblings have these struggles, or were they like the straight A? Like, is it like a runs in the family kind of? I don't mean to be too personal here, but like,
no, you're good. So I'm from a big yours, mine, and ours family, which could create its own case study in psychology and family dynamics.
Right.
It also would make a great Lifetime movie. Essentially, my mom had 3 young kids. Her husband left her, met my dad, sort of Brady Bunch style. He had 4 kids, adopted my mom's 3 kids, and they decided to have 3 kids together. So I'm the first of their 3 they had together. There's 10 in total.
Got it.
So I'm a middle kid, a younger kid, an oldest in some dynamics. Is the 3 they had together. I was born an uncle. I have a niece who's 9 months older than me. So really unique family dynamics. But I would say some of my older siblings, my oldest brother, Reggie, has been a successful entrepreneur, his own companies, and maybe he did a semester or 2 of college. But my dad was a coach. And I would say that some people, they get into teaching because they have a passion for teaching. My dad would be the guy. He's passed, but to the day he died, people call him coach.
Yeah.
He became a teacher so that he could be a full-time coach.
What did he coach, Chad?
Primarily, he was a track athlete in college. Coached a little of everything, but primarily track and cross country. And the thing he loved about those sports, he was a college sprinter. So if you're a sprinter, you can work really hard and get better, like 0.2 seconds in your 100-meter dash, right? Some of it's just aptitude.
Right.
But he really took to cross country early in the sport when it was new in Arizona and Nevada, because he could take any athlete and he could plug them into a system and constantly be thinking about that athlete and his system and improving the training, the health, high altitude train. He had high altitude training camps in the summer where they were getting blood tested when high altitude training was new in the 60s and 70s. He had patents and inventions on pacing devices. A lot of the sort of pacing systems you see today, my dad had patents on them in the 60s and 70s.
Wow.
And so I think we grew up, and my oldest siblings grew up basically with dad coaching all the time. He coached at Mesa High, coached at Las Vegas High, and then they would spend the summers in high altitudes away from the heat in these running camps. And my dad was measuring things and writing books and doing interviews and meeting with engineers. Just kind of the crazy inventor type who's always the first guy inventing it, who doesn't know how to make money at it.
Sounds like Benjamin Franklin a little bit. I mean,
I think some of us hung back and learned a lot of cool lessons from that, and a lot of lessons of things my dad didn't do well from the business experience. As a creative guy, he would get too married to being the original creator, and
right.
So some of the older brothers and sisters didn't do formal education and have done really well. So I had that as a model that you can do well without being academically inclined. Some of my siblings are great. They have advanced degrees. Love structure, got good grades. And my parents were just tired with this last 3 kids, and they would tell you that. It's not a diss on them, but it was basically, my dad was like, "Are people of faith? You know what you've been taught. Just don't do anything dumb. And if you do, come tell us about it." But we didn't really have curfews or structure. And my mom would regret, she'd see all these great families with kids at academic night or whatever, and she'd always regret that she didn't push us harder.
Right.
But essentially the last 3 kids of a family of 10 raised themselves. And so with 10 siblings, we're all completely different. And as we get along,
interesting.
Well, since we're all totally different.
So let's drill in. So it was authority, you said. It was kind of like structure, some of those things that just turned you off as a human.
Yeah.
You think of particular examples, or maybe
sure.
The story of you getting in trouble would be interesting if you're willing to share.
When I was 5 years old, right, I started school, traditional 5-year-old. My mom and dad would tell me, and I remember I said I wanted to be a scientist. So I was very curious. I remember those tanks that could go deep in the ocean being the coolest thing in the world. And we watched Space Camp with my older siblings, and I I loved space and the ocean. I was very curious. But when I got to school and it was sort of learn these things, test on these things, sit still for hours when I wanted to go wander around, and I was raised without a lot of structure, I ended up always being the kid whose desk was right next to the teacher. The teacher thinking, like, he's a great kid, but like they would snap on me, you know, once every couple of weeks. And I would take that really personal. I was very emotional. It would hurt when I would disappoint them, but I couldn't shut up. Still. And after first grade, you know, when they grouped the readers in little groups, I went to Lindbergh Elementary in Mesa. And then we moved later to Patterson and Gilbert. Nothing really changed. But after first, second grade, my parents said, you need to get your kid into summer school. He's not a great reader. And I still remember my mom, who was an artist before she was married and did early childhood education and had a teaching degree. She helped me with Ferdinand the Bull, the book report, and she drew a really cool picture of Ferdinand. And they would make me go to summer school, which I resented even more.
Funny.
Learning.
Some of the best book reports of all time have been made by moms. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, my mom got my eagle for me too.
They're so talented. It's like this underutilized resource.
I would say one of the things, though, I always loved to learn, and my parents had paper routes because we had a big family and their teachers didn't have a lot of money. So we would go on these paper routes, not every night. I wouldn't say that I was like a kid on the farm up at 4 a.m. every day, but on the weekends when you had, back in the day when people used to read print newspapers.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
There was coupons and ads, and you would have to assemble the papers. They would all sort of come out at 2, 3 a.m. when the news was completed from that news cycle prior. And so we kind of learned about the news business in the sense that we were putting things together. And I loved sports, and my dad was a coach. So essentially, my parents just kind of figured out the kid loves to learn and he loves sports. So for Christmas, I would get sports almanacs.
Okay.
The sports section every day, and they would just kind of feed the thing I was interested in outside of school. And then the topics I became really passionate or interested about as I got older just changed. So I was like a really devout kid with my faith, 8th, 9th grade.
Yeah.
And I would hate to read a book I was assigned for school. But I would read scripture, and I would read books, and I would read apologists like arguing against my faith and people for my faith. And I started to learn how to form arguments and hear counter arguments and deal with ambiguity. And I really kind of had my own process of learning on the side. And still in school, I did the bare minimum. I barely graduated high school. At the end of my high school experience, because I sang and I played the violin and I hung out with a lot of great kids, I stayed out of mischief as a fairly devout kid. All of my friends thought I was going to academic night and doing very well. I was there to sing or play the violin, you know.
So what would you just not do the assignments? I mean, was it kind of like, did you make a stink about it? Did you just do you just show up at school and just not turn something in? 'Cause I was always so afraid of like upsetting the teacher that I would like do all the things, even though in my mind it wasn't helping.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of validation at home, and I guess that cuts both ways. I really could care less what the teacher
It didn't matter. You were just sort of like, whatever.
I was a kid of the 90s, and my goal was to be Zach Morris. And so Zach Morris was like this kid who's pretty bright and pretty witty, but he spent all of his extra energy on Saved by the Bell trying to like game the system or get out of an assignment. He ended up doing well on the SAT his senior year and being able to go to college. I never took it, so I don't know.
It's just because they needed another season where the Saved by the Bell kids go to college, you know.
They did. They eventually added that. It was terrible. Don't watch it.
They had to work it out though, to where somehow Zach's got to get into college. How's this going to go?
Yeah, so they can keep the program going.
Right. So it's an SAT miracle. So did you go to college? You did, right? I
did. Yeah, I ended up going. I started with junior college. Ended up going to ASU. To be honest with you, and no one will believe this. And the folks at ASU didn't believe this. I am one class short of my bachelor's degree, graduating with honors. And people will say, well, why don't you just go take that class and finish? And I'm sort of wearing it like as a chip on my shoulder. I've done consulting work for ASU.
Yeah.
I've started an alumni chapter at ASU.
Hilarious.
I so
at ASU, like city council and other like forums and things like that. That's hilarious.
I mean, at some point I'll finish that last math class, but to be really honest and vulnerable, I'm not like some tough guy that just hated authority. People that are maybe exceptional in some area have real disadvantage in others. I'm terrible at abstract like math.
Yeah.
And in science, even in college, I hated it. But I love to read about science and how the world works now.
Right.
I haven't really found that thing that would make me sit still and do well with structure of math. So I'm still the basic math credit short of a bachelor's degree.
So good.
If I ever want to go do advanced degrees and teach, which I have some desire to do, I'll go back and finish my math class.
Someday. It's like, oh, I've had this whole successful career, and now I'm going to go back. And I have this friend, hopefully I'll get him on here at some point, but he's like a STEM YouTube sensation. He has like millions of people following him on YouTube, and he makes these really engaging like science and engineering videos. And he decided to go teach at a school for a little bit. And it was this interesting moment where it was like, oh, actually, like you have to do this like process of, I mean, if anybody's qualified, like this guy's qualified. But it was interesting to see that there were some additional, just sort of like external. What I think is really fascinating about your story is that you have this like this structure that I think dominates the thinking of so many people, right? In terms of like, what's my value? What do I have to do? Like, what should I think? What should I, you know, how should I structure my days and life? And most people like buy into that, you know, at some level, right? It's like, there's a lot of, I think you're getting at like some of the pain that can come with that, where it's like, oh, this one thing that I'm not like naturally, you know, it doesn't come like naturally easy to me. I will, instead of like being in that uncomfortable place, I may decide to sort of like create a sort of a self-preservation story that will help me through that. Like, I don't need abstract math, or we had somebody comment on one of our videos about it's always math. So let's change it. Let's imagine that for you, it was, you know, history or something. It's like, I don't need this history. I can be fine without history. But, you know, like instead of like diving into it and being like curious about that, like, why is this an obstacle for me? And what about almost the way, like, you know, if there's like a swimmer is like trying to compete at swimming and it's the flip turn that's like, they know there's like exactly where the problem is. Instead of like running away from that, a swimmer would like attack that. And learners don't often do that. And part of my exploration here is trying to help people get to a point where they think about it the exact same way, right? Like, I want to be better at business, so I find the one place where I'm like, I could get returns and learn this new thing so that then I will succeed.
Yeah, it's a real balance. I mean, as someone who you're trying to facilitate an environment for great education, and I've actually seen some of the videos from the Friended team on math learners. I was watching that last week, taking notes on, and all of my kids do great at math, right? And so yeah. I was taking notes for me as a lifelong learner on, you know, learning the value of resilience, or you know, some of those different skills. When you hit a roadblock that's difficult, what's a different way to shift your mindset around why you would want to learn it or power through? It's a real balance for students, and it's a balance as you get older, because as your organizations that you're leading grow, or you know, challenges come in that you aren't prepared for, it's always a really difficult decision for me to know, do I spend time learning this thing I'm weak at, or do I spend time growing and learning in my area of strength and build another team member for this other thing?
Yeah.
You're doing K through 12, folks need to at least get to a certain level of aptitude in the different subjects, and you need to help them either love to learn the pain of learning or the value in it, or try to find a way to make it not painful through something they're more interested in.
Right.
Honestly, I just don't have I did not have an aptitude in math.
It didn't come to you naturally.
It didn't, and no one in that structure could convince me otherwise. I had a fear of not graduating because I cared what my peers thought about me my senior year. So finally, my senior year, I got the minimum grade in the second semester sophomore class I needed to graduate. I got my correspondence bowling course in for graduation.
I'm sure you're an excellent bowler to this day. Like it's an interesting question, and we're going through this, building an organization at the same time as trying to change the way kids learn, but there's obviously like not, it doesn't ever make sense for one person to know everything, right? Like you don't need to, but I guess what I hope for people is that they feel confident that they could, right? Like I would love for them to show up at a cocktail reception or whatever, and someone's explaining their job, and you'll hear people say things like, well, I'm no rocket scientist, or I'm no brain surgeon. It's like, you could, if you like made this choice, you could know everything in the world about this one particular field, even though it seems scary. And do you want to? Totally separate question. It's fine with me that people do different things, and I want that. The world needs, everybody to kind of take different pieces of it and let's work together to solve things. But part of what I guess I'm trying to change in the world is like finding those little bits of like, I can't, and like helping people see that you absolutely can, just like in sports or music and any of these other things, it's going to take work. And I'm not telling you have to, just like, I don't care if everybody, plays the electric guitar. If they want to, great. Like everyone should play the electric, but everybody could if they wanted to.
Let me tell you what turned me on to Franklin, and I'll get to the point of why I'm super interested in apprentice schools and why I've been interested even before you created it. I had a real need to have close friendships and relationships and to feel a sense of camaraderie.
Yeah.
And that was filled for me in sports. You're on a team in sports and you have a mentor and a coach. And those were authority figures I knew cared about me. They were interested in my learning, and I hated to let them down. In music, you have the same thing. You have directors or private lessons teachers, and you have this camaraderie in a band or an orchestra or a choir or an a cappella group, which I sang in. And I really enjoyed that camaraderie. And when you get into adult schools, whether that's high school or into college, and there are checklists and criteria, and you're meeting the aptitude of a system, I would feel really left out. And what I was attracted to Franklin about is in my early 20s, after having 3 years off from school, and I decided I wanted to engage in this thing called college, I read Franklin's autobiography, and he had that natural desire to learn with other people. And kind of, I had a judge who I met in DC when I was out there serving as a missionary, who was a really brilliant guy. He's a retired federal judge in the DC Court of Appeals. And he said to me, hey, when you go home, when you decide to engage in school, before you go to school, just think of this amazingly complex, beautiful world and universe, and just try to look at it afresh with like fresh eyes on everything, and just be curious. And one of the first books I'd read that I chose to read was the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. He had a group called the Junto, Junto. You can Google it. And he created his own learning society. They created rules and structure. But I saw that a lot of great learners, whether it was C.S. Lewis and his group, business.
Albert Einstein at Princeton, the Princeton.
Yeah, Einstein, the Olympia Academy. I mean, they all had, even when they were in formal schooling, they would have small groups that they would learn and engage and discuss.
Yeah.
And so I started I love that concept, and I was seeking that on the side on top of my formal learning with friends who were bright and frankly who were different than me and had different aptitudes.
Yeah.
And that's, if you can figure out how to do that in younger grades for people who don't love structure. For me, I don't know that I lacked an aptitude in math per se or science. It was the fact that being in a classroom of 30 or 35 people, feeling chained to a desk as the son of a coach who used to, run free, was running around all the time. I could not sit still and listen and not zone out on step 3 of a math problem. and I cared what people thought. I wanted to be cool, right? So when the teacher says, feel comfortable asking me any question,
you're like, no,
I'm not going to ask in front of 30 kids. And when I did, and I still didn't get it, the teacher couldn't stop the classroom for 20 minutes.
Right.
I did not understand what was going on. And so I physically would get anxiety when I didn't know what anxiety was, but I would physically feel
this
levels like rising in my shoulders.
Yeah.
I would hit those points. And now I recognize them, and it's okay, and I can find different ways to break through and learn.
So interesting. Well, Chad, I mean, thank you for diving back into your kind of childhood, your school and college. It's really interesting to hear kind of your journey and to see what got you. I love the role. If we had another half hour, I'd love to drill into this idea of like learning together. The junto's a super interesting concept in education from literally the 1700s, you know, and it's not new there. Like there were people doing it before and since. But yeah, I mean, I think I share a lot of your philosophies and ideas about what we can do. And my goal is just to get them, if we can create a space that's literally safe for people to not know something and to ask questions and help each other, to where it's, when you asked a good question about something you don't know, your peers would like congratulate you more than they would, you know, think less of you. And I think we can move that direction. It's been fun to see some of that happening in a small, you know, safe micro school environment. Not that this is a commercial. Chad, thank you so much. This has been fascinating.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.